Guys, how cool is it to just be here and see just the dynamics of what it takes to kind of compete in the SEC, right? Like a lot of people in this room. Sorry, I'm struggling to find this. A lot of people in this room, and I think at the end of the day, what you can see is a clear and consistent message, right? So with this group, I think the biggest thing that we've all heard is they value long-term development, right? The passion that you heard in Beth a minute ago, what you heard Q, and then the message that the coaches are sending, to me, it's pretty powerful. And I think that's what it takes now to actually develop athletes and to develop the best baseball players. And truly humbling to be a part of that. Something I know we're trying to do with the Orioles. So with that being said, we'll talk a little bit about high performance. So I think it's a little bit of a garbage term we'll talk about in a second, but we'll kind of explore this. Really, we'll give it a definition. We'll explore it from maybe the 30,000-foot view. We'll kind of go down to the 300-foot view, spend a little time in the principles and habits, which we've talked a lot about today. And I may speak and pivot a little bit more towards a strategy because honestly, there's some powerful messages so far. So far. Then we'll go into the trenches, getting into the nitty gritty and kind of the fun stuff. Okay. So let's give it a definition. So developing athletes to their highest potential using various resources and implementations. The goal is to basically provide a robust athleticism and to keep the players on the field, right? So we have two realms. We have building an athlete and we have making a baseball player. All right. So we'll talk a little bit about those dynamics. And ultimately, how do you build a philosophy with that in mind, right? Not just the here and now, understanding that it does take time, but we also don't have 10 years to do this. So you've got to kind of balance that curve. And then what categories do you even consider in development? Okay. So we'll go through, for me, the keys to development in general, right? We have to set the standard. And that's the message that you heard. To me, the staff, they lead the charge on this. Okay. We will need to be able to communicate the plan to the player and to the baseball coaches. So there are some people in this room who you may be the skills coach and the strength coach, right? So being able to foster how those balance together and what this kind of looks like, right? So you see all these fun movements, right? These are cool, these are awesome. But as Q just mentioned, some of those, sorry, they went a little fast. Some of those take time to get to, right? So we'll kind of talk about how to get there. We have to create consistency. Consistency is key, right? In the university setting, you basically get guys on a 4-year loop, right? You get long-term development. You get them 18 weeks in a row. And then obviously the season itself, it's uninterrupted, right? You have to be cognizant that the goal is to win games. But as Q mentioned earlier, what my experience was at Coastal Carolina, Western Carolina, Georgia Tech, was that we could actually foster development in season, right? And so we'll talk a little bit about what that looks like. Driving intent, right? Like who wouldn't want to go freaking lift with Q right now, right? Like the personality of it, is just a big piece of it, okay? And at the end of the day, the biggest piece that we can do is help our players drive that intent, all right? And then we want to be able to create challenging environments, okay? With that, map the progress when we go. I think the big thing these days is you've got to keep the attention of the players. So we want to be able to compete. We want to gamify when possible. We want to get these guys engaged at different levels, right? Not everybody's going to come in here and be a weight room All-American. So we've got to be able to reach our total audience. In a lot of ways, that's culture, but sometimes that's also being able to compete and go from there. Just playing music.
No, trying to get a screen up here.
Oh, it's not. Okay.
Yeah, it's just there you go. Just do your animation.
Yeah.
Your slideshow.
Sorry about that. So now creating that culture, the high performance culture. So to me, you guys heard it from Tony. I mean, it starts with the freaking head coach. If you don't have your head coach on board, it's really, really tough to do the things that it kind of takes to develop over time. Okay. If he's on board, which in my mind, that is step one, then you need to encompass this in your DNA, right? So at Coastal, we actually had a mat that had selfless and relentless on it. All of our lockers had selfless and relentless on it. It didn't have your name per se. It had your number, but it had selfless and relentless on it. Those were the messages that we used at Coastal. All right. And that had been the same way with Gilly for 10, 20 years. All right. We have to take that into not only the weight room, but this environment of long-term culture. All right, I think we're good. Yeah. Okay. Sorry about that. Little technical difficulties. Okay. And then players become coaches. As Q said, in the end, if you're doing a great job developing them, if you have the right culture, you're teaching them, then they end up coaching themselves. As coaches, we have to remember they also have a soul, right? Like we're not just dealing with this player who has this ability and we're trying to get him to this ability, right? So we have to remember that aspect, the human effect. All right. So now, in the end, I think the biggest part when we're starting with this long-term development is making sure that we have patience, right? You can't rush this process. That's something I messed up a little bit early on, was creating this process of um, was basically always having to come back because we're going through strength a little bit too fast, right? So something I always kind of say is in 2013, I was working at Western Carolina. We led the nation in home runs, but we also led the nation in the sorest players ever, right? And in the end, we failed to reach our end goal of making a regional, okay? So that was a learning opportunity for me. I needed to understand how the dynamics of the sport were. It's not just about the weight room. It's not just about being strong. And some of this today even is based off of that, okay? The most important phase for us is this 15 to 21-year-old. This is my favorite part, okay? These guys are getting into their pubescent range, right? So their testosterone, HGH, we're seeing all these factors here. And if you start to take out parts of your schedule due to playing baseball or games, whatever, you're missing this huge training age. Okay, so you have to be patient, but you also have to understand that it's time to get work done here. High accountability with your group. Okay, and then this can be a team or a culture building aspect in the weight room, and I would really encourage that aspect to be in your side. And then again, we want to create teachers. So you see in this drill right here, we put a cone. You kind of saw the same exact thing that Q was doing, but I basically challenged them. We had done this for 2 weeks. These are our freshmen coming in, and they're done for the day if everybody goes through twice without dropping that cone on their back, right? Okay, so guys are engaged. They're starting to jump in. They're helping each other set up the cone. They're coaching each other up on how to keep that neutral spine. Okay. All right. So we have to understand, basically understand what we're looking at in the realm of what's this process of development. So there's a continuum here, right? So you have movement, strength, power, and specific power. You're never really in one of these categories. But if you do not handle the movement aspect, as I mentioned earlier, and you do not set the global strength factor, and you try to move on too fast, then you're always going to have to come back and get this bottom. You're going to always have to come back to either technique or hit movements these guys aren't capable of in the box, on the mound, or in the field. Okay. So for me, I think that's a big deal, and something I didn't understand early on in my career. Okay. The strength aspect, I think that's kind of a garbage term of what we need. But for today, I just want you to know, like, the ability to produce force, right? It doesn't mean I squat X number on the bar. It doesn't mean I'm picking this up from the ground, although that's definitely an aspect. We have to teach our guys how to use the ground and create force through our feet. Okay, something I'd love to talk a little bit deeper after this. Okay, we talked about creating a year-long program. Okay, so for me, this is something I didn't start doing until about my 4th or 5th year. All right. And this is rudimentary. I put this together in probably 30 minutes. And I used this in 2015, 2016, in my interview to get to Coastal. And basically all I was trying to communicate was this ability to kind of understand where I'm at in the training phases of the calendar. So this is obviously in school. So I kind of started basically at the tail end of the year. The team made the regional, but lost in that regional. All right. So boom, we're transitioning. A lot of guys went to summer ball, but a lot of guys actually came in my first month and trained with me. So I needed to teach them the program, but I wanted to start to get back to these guys getting healthy, the general physical preparation, so that I could get into hypertrophy, work capacity, and start building that strength, right? If I would have just ran right into strength, we would have had a lot of guys struggling. We would have had a lot of guys sore, injured. I would have had to teach the movements over again. I would have had to undulate throughout the season and kind of match up those off periods, okay? If you look at this, so look at the periodization, okay? And then look at about mid-August all the way through the first part to mid and late November, right? Okay, that is our strength phase. And if you do this right and you spend the time there and you aren't just crushing them, but you're building them up, guess what? I only have to do a strength peak one time in season, right? You can hold on to strength for roughly 12 to 15 weeks if you do it right. So while everybody else was getting ready for a regional in that late May, early June, and they're maxing out, they're hitting 90% for 2 on a front squat. I had our guys with chains and we were working somewhere in that 1.25. So we were working on really specific power aspect or speed aspect. And I was trying to get my guys the most powerful they've been all year, peak them for the playoffs, or I'm sorry, for a regional. Okay. You can kind of see here, I wanted to map out for our coaches when we were testing, right? Those are the weeks that I'm going to be crushing those guys. And on the field, we basically took 20% off of our throwing, 20% off of our swinging. We took 20% off of our running, right? Because I knew that all of our training economy, a lot of that was going to be used in the weight room or on our testing. Okay, so that's how you can kind of start to communicate with your coaches, start to look into workload without having to dive into too many details, okay? And then the last part is just, I think it's really important to go back. You kind of see at the bottom, like what really happened, right? So there was actually a hurricane that year, okay? Map those out so you can see what happened last year, what went well, what didn't go well, what do I need to do? For 5 years, my first 5 years of being a professional strength coach, I didn't have those. I went back and I would try to remember, I would look back at notes and it was just not organized. I really challenge everybody. This is what I challenge our group to do. Make sure you take that extra 5 minutes and go back and see what that week looks like, okay? Now Q hit on this and he hit on it really, really well. I just wanted to give a little bit of some credence into, you don't have to use these. These are just kind of some of our maybe movements. This isn't all of them, but I wanted to get a picture of like, hey, if I'm dealing with a 16-year-old Latin player in the DR, or you guys are dealing with maybe a sophomore in high school or a freshman in college, right? Where do I want to start them and where do I want to go? All right. And then when things don't go well, as Q said, where do I need to regress to? And I have a mapping. I'm not making that up on the go. I can see that clearly in my program, and it's planned and it's understood with the players as well. Okay. So now we'll take a look at the 300-foot view. I think the biggest piece here is just to understand we've got principles, we've got habits, and then we need to basically take a holistic view at what these parts of high performance are. Okay. So I'll go through these a little quickly because I think Q hammered on these really, really well. We'll kind of spend some time on some of these, but in our program and our philosophy, we want to train all 3 planes of motion, right? We have to hit those. We're sagittal warriors, majority of our guys. And if I just spent time squatting, deadlifting, even just lunging, right? I'm going to create these guys sagittal warrior. Our game happens in 3 planes. And it actually, a big piece of that happens in the transverse plane, that rotation piece, right? There's a lot of things that we have to take into effect with swing counts, things like that. But if we're not controlling those planes, we don't own those planes, and we're not regularly visiting those in multiple movements, then I think you're leaving a lot of development on the table, okay? The 3 phases, which you guys know, 3 speeds of contractions, and then making sure you're, like we showed in the year-long program, like, are we undulating in the strength, speed, power? Are we ebbing and flowing? Or are we just spending a full year in that and mitigating our rates of return? Okay. We'll talk about the core training. movement and skill transfer. We'll talk about especially athleticism and speed, which I love Q showed on. That's a big piece for us. And then training upper body. Obviously, that's a pretty big emphasis for us in baseball. Okay. We'll only touch a little bit about coaching, but what is your coaching philosophy? Right? I ask our coaches, you get 2 minutes. Who are you as a coach? Right? If you can't answer that, then you don't really have a coaching philosophy. Okay. So make sure you understand that, your staff understands that, and you should be able to see that and grade yourself on a weekly basis. Okay. Kind of a big term. Maybe this is more in the high school or a professional realm, but it's been going around for 5 or 10 years. Like, what's this idea of athletic performance versus injury prevention? I'll take a look at hamstrings here in a second. But for me, it's both, right? Like, who wouldn't want a strong, stable, powerful, efficient mover with high capacity who's great at recovering, right? Like, that's a person who's going to be robust. He's going to be athletic and he's going to be great at baseball, pretty much, right? We want to look at the links of mechanisms, right? So we know the general things that we can prevent in a hamstring injury, right? We know some of the mechanisms. And so we'll walk through that in a little bit. All right. But in the end, we want to be able to have robust, powerful athletes that are capable of dominating not only their on-field techniques, the movements they need, but negotiating the daily energy and force requirements, right? So that's what we do as strength conditioning. That's what we do in high performance. Spending a quick second on that coaching aspect, the attention to detail. This is my baby right here. Okay. I don't want a weight room monitor, right? I want a strength coach in there. Okay. For me, it's not always what you do, it's how you do it. All right. So you can kind of see in that top realm, take a look at that lumbopelvic area, right? So he's dumping pretty big into that pelvic tilt. Okay. We have to teach these young athletes how to find neutral, right? And that's great if you can do that standing up or on an assessment. But can you do that when you're stabilizing, when you're in motion, when you're having to do this in reaction sport? Okay. If you can't do it in the weight room, I agree with Q. You got no shot at doing it on the field, right? That is our job. Okay. So we want to help these guys find neutral. Again, low backs are going to be the #1 injury in sports or #1 injury in baseball multiple years. So we've got to be able to give them the ability to mitigate that. The last thing with technique is not only for safety, so you don't get hurt in the weight room. It's the key to motor control. So motor control is basically the ability for your brain, your central nervous system, and your muscle fibers to work together in unison and understand coordination and to stabilize efficiently. All right. That's what we do in baseball. Okay. So now, how do we fill our cup? Taking a little bit of a global perspective, Beth crushed this. So I don't even have to go into this too much, but I like this picture because it basically gives us, I think a lot of times we think of recovery after the fact, right? It's like, hey, I got to recover because I worked hard. No, you got to recover because tomorrow you're freaking getting after it again. And we think of recovery on the front end, especially in the college realm. That was the part we're doing. You can only train as hard as you can recover. It's kind of a term that's lost a lot of its, it probably sounds cooler to me than it does most. But I think that's a big initiative. That's first and foremost. Okay. Again, Beth and Q crushed this, but here are our 4 parts: the sleep, nutrition and hydration, mindset and stress control, which I don't think we talk about enough. And I don't think we understand enough in what we're doing, right? We don't know what our players are going through. And there's also an ability. You don't have to be a mental skills strength coach or a mental skills coach to be able to understand what mindfulness is, right? There's so many resources out there to help keep our guys grounded and their feet where they are, to not lose focus. And a lot of the times, you guys are the ones who have done this before. You've played in that. You've struggled at the plate. You haven't been able to throw strikes, right? So you uptick what your experiences are and help the players through those. Okay. I think that's a big realm that I think we miss a little bit. And then owning your routines. Okay. I didn't say rent them. We're owning our routines. Do you know what you need every day? Do you know what makes your body specifically unique? And then can you recover? What's your preparation like? What are your lift sequences, your speed, athleticism, and conditioning? Okay. Next, again, Beth crushed this. I might just skip right to the strategy. I think she hit it out the ballpark. The big thing too is we get our guys, the average sleep right now for a teenager is around 6 hours. Okay. Research says we should be getting 9 hours, and majority of our athletes are getting, or majority of our professional baseball players, the ones that stick around, they actually get more than 9 hours. Okay. Well, why is that important? Well, those last 2 hours, and Beth touched on this a little bit, but 95% of your HGH creation happens in that, basically the last portion of the sleep cycle. Okay. Majority of your skill sweeping of bad movement patterns and like all the struggles you had today, you didn't solve that problem well, you didn't move well, you had to figure this part out, gets swept away, and you keep the good, basically making those long-term movements or memories, depending on if it's cognition or movement. Okay. And then this is a big one. I kind of laugh at some of our, especially our starting pitchers who have freaking 5 days in between. It's like, okay, you think you can survive on 6 hours of sleep? Well, rounded to the nearest zero, literally just the normal population, 0% of those, 0% of our population can actually function on 6 hours of sleep or less. Okay. Some of us in this room are doing that today. All right. So what's our strategy? We have to educate ourselves, right? There's so much knowledge out there. I'm pretty big on Matthew Walker. He wrote Why We Sleep. He's the leading, in my opinion, he's probably the leading expert. Read that book. It's very intricate in the science portion, but if you can just come up with a quick slide deck for your players on that, that's what we've done. Every coach needs to push this, not just the strength coach, not just one coach. Educate the players, give them resources. You kind of see this on the right, the purple sign right there. That's actually an app that's a noise canceling machine. So some of your guys who are finicky sleepers, they wake up easily, pop that on. There's a lot. So blue light blockers, things like that Beth talked about. When you guys travel, depending on how much you travel, one of the things that I just found out this year, 14 years in, let's take the hangers, let's close those so that the light doesn't wake us up first thing in the morning after a long night, right? Okay, very simple thing. And then sleep like it's your job. Okay. All right, the nutrition aspect, just a huge tool. Beth crushed this. Our goal should be, not as dietitians, to take away the I don't know effect, right? You can't say I don't know. If you played for us, you can't say I don't know. I'm not an expert, but I've given you level 1. We'll talk about some of the tools in a second. And we've created a culture, right? Okay. If you want to do 38 minutes of burpees, you can have a Big Mac. That's what I would tell my players in college, right? That's how many calories, that's how long it takes. Like, okay, I see you bringing McDonald's into the clubhouse. I'll see you in 20 minutes. We got our 38 minutes right now, right? You only do that once, okay? And you're not bringing Big Macs around me, okay? The performance plate is a big one. Beth talked about that. Utilizing some tools if you aren't an expert like Beth is. MyFitnessPal is one. And then just having your own healthy habits, right? So these are pictures 6 months apart. Okay, these guys came into our program for the first time, and basically we challenged these guys. As you can see, the guy on the on top, this guy ate like a bird. He didn't understand how much he actually needed to eat. The guy on the bottom, he ate all of that guy's extra food and then some, right? So all we did was just change some quick habits. We trained our asses off, and in the end, these guys changed the trajectory of their careers. Both these guys went into pro ball. One of these guys is still playing now, and this is back in 2016. Okay. So now core, I'll spend a little bit of time on here, but I think the big thing is to understand the purpose. Like, we want to protect the spine. That's number one. That's the core's job, number one. Secondly, we want to resist movement. So a lot of times we're like trying to do all these things with our young players with some of these new mechanisms that are out. I really want to challenge you, for the health of your players, for the long-term development, resist movement before you want to create movement. And then on top of that, after you get to that stage, we want to be able to produce power and continue that up the chain. Okay. Here are the movements on the right. I'm not going to spend too long on them, but those are the movements that we want to see in the weight room. All right. And those are the ones that you want to be able to do probably in your prep or pre-lift or just in its own program. All right. You need to be able to see these. For us, we try to get every category every 3 days. Okay. You're not going to be able to do these all the time, but can I get every category every 3 days? Right. And then over time, just like we talked about earlier, can we progress those and challenge those and basically make this core work well for us? Good. So what happens when core is not strong, right? So you kind of see, I don't know how many are familiar with the kinematic sequence, but this is actually one of our players that turned to coach, and you can kind of see why he turned to coach. That bottom right, we want to see steep declines without some big inclines. So if you look at the chart, or sorry, the graph, the kinematic graph right there, you see, we want to see a big peak and then a good valley, right? So you see this kind of trailing off, trailing off, trailing off. He doesn't know how to decelerate. He doesn't know how to control his pelvis, right? And eventually that's a power leak for sure. Okay. So the stronger you get your core, obviously you work on mechanics and the biomechanics and the swing. That's where you want to merge them together. Okay. But our hitting coach would be asking this guy to do something he can't do if we're just trying to crush this guy with mechanic work and work on that swing. Okay. All right. Now, training the upper body, a big piece for me. I think this is something underutilized in baseball. Okay. I went out to a private facility. I thought I was doing pretty well in this. I saw him training his athletes for 3 days, and I had to come back, see my family, and I flew right back 3 days later because of how he was doing this right here. In college, this is before COVID, we would actually train with our shirt off. I want to see that scap and that humerus work together. So we call that rhythm. There should be 2 degrees to 1 degree. So that humerus should move 2 degrees to 1 degree for that scapula, right? It's a ball and T socket. So I want to be, or sorry, think of the T as the scap and the ball is the humerus. They need to move together, right? I don't want that ball coming off the T. Well, guess what? If you're training this correctly in the weight room, I should not be able to get my fingers underneath your scap if I go in the back. You want to build that lower trap and that rhomboid. We have our guys, they walk around with these gigantic traps just like Q, but they have no rhomboid. They have no lower trap. And that's really what's going to decelerate the ball or the arm coming forward. And that's going to be a big piece of essentially that scap load in the swing or the throw. Okay. So 2-to-1 ratio. If we focus on the mechanics of this, then we can train hard. You should not be afraid to train hard our body. Okay. All right. So a quick free lift. I would just ask you guys to take a quick snapshot of this. Have a structure for your pre-lift. I think a lot of times it's, hey, let's get on the bar. We'll do like a warm up at 25%, 50%. No, if we're actually teaching movement, you've got to find places in your program to spend time on it. And so this is what we do. Q talked about this. We would start with the myofascial. So that's the foam roll or the recovery soft tissue. Then we would go to mobility. All right. We want to be ground-based, movement-based. Your hips have basically 6 hip actions. We want to work on the spine. I'll show you in a second. And we want to be able to work on that overhead. Then we'll get to activating the movements that we need, the muscle tissue, strengthening the muscle tissue in certain realms, stabilize the core, stabilize those movements, and then we want to explode. We want to get ready for the activity we're about to do. Okay, so quick video. Here are some of the movements that we value. World's greatest. Nothing groundbreaking here, but we just focus on it. We spend the time, we coach it. These guys coach each other, okay? And in the end, right, we're stacking up all of these categories. We want to create efficient movers, right? You do that by moving well. You move through range of motion, okay? Good, so owning the athletic position, okay? So we want to be chest over knees, knees over toes, all right? And we'll have our guys fire down. We call these fire downs. And I will go through and I will push their knee. I will try to move them. I will try to shove them out of the way, right? I tell them, if I were to tackle you, you would hurt me. A lot of these guys, they don't understand how to decelerate, how to land, how to change a direction. These guys aren't falling out of trees like we did when we were growing up, right? They aren't fighting their brothers and sisters outside and having to stabilize. So we have to teach them. You want to be strong in that position. And I'm going to show you a video in a second. But basically, this is the same capability to absorb force and create ground force reaction, which, by the way, are very important in baseball, in throwing and hitting. Okay. And so I'll show you a little bit. These are our pro guys coming back. And I think this is 2018. Very first thing we're doing, just an easy fire down sequence, right? Okay. These guys are freaking getting paid to play baseball, right? We still want to make sure that we own this position before we go. Okay. Now this next group, this is kind of the end goal. This is the end progression. Here's where they get really excited. Right? Look at the look on this guy's face. He surprised himself. Why? Because this was him just 3 months earlier. This is the whole group. They fall on a very simple one, right? So what do? You don't get to move on until you dominate this position, right? Boom. All right. So they got there. What does that mean? We own this position right here. Can I decelerate? Am I putting force into the ground? Am I ending chest over knees, knees over toes? Okay. Boom, and you see this guy take an extra step, he's leaning a little bit. Okay, no problem. This is actually a pitcher. Our football team had just done 5-10-5s. They just did basically that agility, and he just beat all of their times. He did a warm up there, and he just walked outside after our lift and beat every single one of our football players' times. That's a pitcher. He's a good athlete, though. We'll let him do it. Okay. So speed, another big passion of mine. All right. I think in baseball, we know it. The game of baseball does not make you faster. We learned that over time. It doesn't make you more athletic, and it can't keep you healthy. So that's where we have to come in on our end. In this realm of speed or teaching athleticism, or however you want to term the phrase, there are categories you want to hit, right? So those are all right there. I think some of the big ones are just making sure we're touching this. You have a plan in your schedule. So that pre-game, if you will, is a huge opportunity. Are you just running to get ready for the game? Are you exposing your athletes to these movements and asking for intent? In the fall, right? So I'm going to play this video real quick. So here are some of the strategies that we use. In the fall, are you competing? Are you getting these guys full of intent, right? Are you asking the most of them? Are you exposing them to these movements that we're talking about? Right? I want to get these guys talking trash. I want to get a ball in my hand and not just have cones on the ground, right? I want to get creative, right? So we're working a little bit of overtraining here. Boom. What's that athletic position? Now we're working curvilinear. You can see this guy's ankles. This is a freshman, elite athlete, no ankle stability. As soon as I saw this video, ouch, right there. Hey, we got work to do. Like, we're going to take a few weeks to work on this. Gilly, I need some time with this guy. I know he's a great athlete, but we need to get this guy a little ankle stability before he hurts himself, right? But you can kind of see we're driving intent. We're forcing those guys to attack the curve. We're accelerating through the curve, right? And we're trying to keep our mechanics, okay? So just have fun with that aspect. So working backwards a little bit, all right? Again, the hamstring model. We know what causes hamstring issues, right? So lack of eccentric isometric strength, inability to coordinate hip and knee, whether it's high speed, acceleration, base running lean, or decelerations, right? We know some of these aspects, the workload component, right? So what are we doing to build a program against that? Essentially working backwards. The patterns that we care about, the hinge, the squat, the ability to absorb force and change directions, right? So I think those are all big to note, and make sure you have answers in your category, okay? So maybe the final note, and all encompassing everything, in my opinion, that Q, Beth, myself, what we're talking about, right? So we want to have challenging training, but appropriate training. The on-field skill, deliberate practice, how we coach our guys' strength conditioning, plus the adequate recovery, the sleep, nutrition, hydration, and your routines that you create. That's high performance. That's how you deliver basically a long-term development program. Okay. I work in an area where I have over $300,000 in budget for technology. Okay. And I will still tell you, these are the keys. And I didn't mention any technology today. Did you guys hear Q talk a lot about technology, right? They're winning World Series. What really, really matters is, are you doing these small things right? Because nobody else wants to do that. Okay. So last thing, I appreciate you guys' attention. I know it's been a long day. We had some technical difficulties. I don't even know if we fully got it all the way operational. We figured the frick out, right? Thank you to Q, this awesome staff here, amazing facilities, second best program behind Coastal in the world, right? But also thank you to the PBS CCS, right? Like, we just had a bone crushing week. They've been preparing for months. We get on a bus coming over here. It's not lost on me, the effort that goes into this and getting this done. So God bless you guys. I hope you guys took a few things away, and just really appreciate your time today. Good.